from Yes We Cannibal. Welcome to this week's edition of Meet.
Observer.
Thinker.
Every human society
Must justify its inequalities. In today's societies, these self-justifying narratives comprise themes of
property, entrepreneurship, and meritocracy.
Socio-economic inequality has increased
In all regions of the world since the 1980s. This discourse of meritocracy and entrepreneurship often seems to serve
as a way for the winners of today's economy to justify any level of inequality whatsoever,
while blaming the loser
for lacking talent, virtue, and diligence.
Hi, welcome to this week's Sunday Salon, Yes We Cannibals Meet, featuring Josephine Anstey and the debut of her new claymation works, Pick and Eddie. Yes We Cannibal is a artist-run collaborative experimental space hosting all kinds of experimental work from performance to music to art exhibits. Today's artist talk is going to be an introduction to Josephine Anstey's new project, a series of claymations examining economic stories. We're thrilled to welcome media artist Josephine Anstey, whose career has encompassed expanded narrative, performance, games, and virtual reality. I also want to share with you that we just have at Yes We Cannibal new calendars debuting our December programming. We're going to be taking a break this coming Sunday for Thanksgiving, but we'll be back on December 5th with Soul Lab Sundays, a local hip hop showcase. And then following that, we're going to have an experimental improv here, meet, where various sound artists are paired by chance to improv together. So please tune in for that. And without further ado, I want to introduce Josephine Anstey. Hello and welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Yes We Cannibal. I'm very excited to be here and to share some of this recent work with you. At the beginning, we just saw a really quick, pretty much edited in camera or in phone video that I made for this presentation, which stars Pick and Eddie, who are the characters in my animation. So I thought I'd just show you some of the actors. Here are Pick and Eddie. My daughter made these little figures out of clay. They're baked clay. These two got burnt on the bottom. And I really liked them. I really loved them. And I decided, or I thought it would be really fun if I could use them in a video. So I asked her about it and she said no. And then years went by and she made more and more. Here is some you're going to be seeing featured later. There's this one, and just a second ago, this horn that goes on the top of her head fell off. I don't think I can put it on. So she made these kind of figures, and they all have, some of them have a similar look. They have like little round arms and little round feet, and this one is very similar to that, and has a tail, has a horn. So this guy also very similar, more like a horse. And all of these were kind of inspirational to me, as I thought it would be really fun to make videos with them. So I started with the creatures, just showing you the final creatures that you're going to actually see in the videos soon. You can see they're pretty small. This one is like a pig. And finally, she became very interested in horses, and she made this guy, who is quite different. He's much more like a horse. I have a little stage here that he's on, but his head, if you can see it, is now eating. He's eating grass, but it started out higher up, and now it's like sunken down. But they all have sort of I don't know. They were all characterful, and so they were really inspirational for me when I started thinking about doing these videos. So that was the first thing. I'm going to put Piketty right back in here so they can be part of this. So then the second thing was, the second piece of inspiration was Thomas Piketty. So I heard of Thomas Piketty and the first book he wrote, maybe not his first book, but the book that became very, very famous, which was Capital in the 21st Century. That was published in 2013. I didn't read it, and I'm not really completely sure that I know what the thesis of it was, but I really very strongly got the idea that this man came along and produced statistics. We were all kind of like drowning in like neoliberalism, and there just seemed to be a willful blindness to the concentration of wealth. There was, of course, there was the Occupy movement and the 90% and the idea of the 90% or the 99% were really struggling, while the 1% or the 10% were really doing well. But for many people, I think there was just complete kind of denial of the levels of injustice and inequality that we were just living with, or just a kind of ignorance about it. And then he came along with these very hard-nosed statistics that said, look, since the 1980s, these statistics show that the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. And I mean, it's a fact. And basically he was demonstrating the rise in inequality in recent times by literally showing the rise in economic inequality. So I was struck by, I don't know, I liked the hard-nosedness of those statistics. And then my partner very kindly gave me Piketty's second book, Capital and Ideology, a huge tome. And I started to read it, and I began to think it would be great to call these two characters Pik and Etty. This is Pik, and Pik had, you'll see in the video later, a little pick on their head, which has fallen off since, and this is Etty. So I thought that would be funny. And I asked my daughter again whether I could have permission to use her figures. And by this time, enough time had passed, she was less protective of them, and she said I could. Then I made this IKEA room divider. And I thought these little shelves made beautiful little stages. So I thought, I've got a stage, my own studio. I've got my characters, and I've got the kind of work. I've got the beginning of an idea of what I want to do. I want to do something about economics. So the video you just saw, that little opening video, is taken from the introduction to Capital and Ideology. And Piketty says, all human societies must justify inequalities. And currently, at the moment, this is done by narratives or stories about property, entrepreneurship, and meritocracy. And he suggests that these stories are used to justify any amount in increasingly brutal inequality. And he calls for a new universalistic and egalitarian narrative. I'm not sure, given my background, which I guess I studied the economics, whatever economics I studied was not very much, and it was mostly around Marx. And my understanding of ideology is quite different from Piketty's. And I really, it's not that these videos are really kind of explaining Piketty, but as I started to read this book, his statistics continued to shock me. I mean, I'm just shocked by the things I didn't know. These like, in some ways, incontrovertible statistics. And I'm sure other people will deny them, but he does a huge job of collecting these statistics. and he shows you where he gets the statistics from. And so I did find that I was shocked by various statistics. And so the first shock that came to me was Piketty's take on the French Revolution. I was going to show you this thing. Piketty, the failure of the French Revolution, and it basically shows that before and after the revolution, the property that people owned, the same few percentage of people owned as much property before the revolution and then a few years after the revolution. And that was like a shock. I'm like, oh, so I made the first video, which was called Piketty in the French Revolution. And so, sorry, Liz, I only just saw your notice. So
that's okay, but you also have a question asking what changed Lucy's mind about allowing the figures in the video?
I don't know. It was many years. She made these perhaps when she was 8 or 9, and now she's 16. So I think she just became less protective of them, perhaps. And I don't know. I maybe I was over persistent. Every few years I'd ask, and then I asked again. These two, Pick and Etty, were sitting on my kitchen windowsill for years, and their little bottoms made me think I really want to have them playing about in mud and talking seriously about world events. So I just came around again that I wanted to use them, and I asked her again, and she just said yes. So it was like, thank you. And then I gathered up all of the creatures, all the animals I could find, and said, can I use all of them? And she said I could use all of them. So yeah, I'm just looking at the thing. So now, if you wouldn't mind showing the first video, I understand I should mute for this.
I am Pick, thinker, maker, reenactor.
I'm Etty, observer, analyste, rénacteur.
Piketty in the failure of the French Revolution.
Paris, la France.
Oppression reigns. The groaning.
The groaning of the poor.
1780, 10% of the people own 80% of the wealth.
The top 1% are 1,500 times richer than the bottom 50% are.
Let them eat cake.
1789. Revolution.
Révolution.
1793. A perfect revolution. Now, we eat cake.
A very successful revolution.
1810, 10% of the people own 80% of the wealth. 1780, 10% of the people own 80% of the wealth.
What?
So you were inspired by this shock of these statistics, yeah? And when you were saying that, I was sort of wondering if there's a relationship between your work with games and your work with narrative and wanting to narrativize the statistics.
What a hard question. I think there has been a progression. That's a really, really good question, because I think I don't know if it comes in my work with my own work with games, but I teach about games, and I teach about, actually more recently I teach sort of a class called social and mobile media, and there's a way that in that class we talk about data and big data, and we often, it's a class in which we often talk about the problems involved with, the collecting of data, the scraping of data, and the uses it's put to. But in my own thinking for myself, I guess I'm always also interested in the way data can be used to illustrate and to prove evidence in a really compelling way. So I guess I think it's a little bit more to do with my relationship to science in general, and thinking. I'm a big geek in terms of all kinds of science. I have a critical stance in some ways on the scientific method, but at the same time, I think I like nothing better than looking at, reading about and listening to podcasts about science, and the biological sciences, the science around environmental movements, and also, space science. So I think I was very taken by Piketty's use of statistics and data, because so often those things are used to oppress, and here was somebody who seemed to be taking them and using them to sort of fight back for a liberal, maybe beyond liberal position. Okay, do I still need to tilt my camera, or is it all right?
You're good.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the next shock. Oh, just to talk a little bit about the French Revolution radio. For me, there was something so shocking about the notion that the French Revolution, which seems so important and so radical and fundamental for our ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But there was something so shocking that the economic impact was very minimal, that the rich, or the same proportion of people stayed rich and the same proportion of people stayed poor. I don't think that's the only measure of importance for the French Revolution and what it did, but I think it's a statistic that should be in our minds. I think it should be more known. As I went on reading Capital and Ideology, I came to the section about progressive taxation, and this was, for me, another shock. The tables, I have the tables here, and I think it's something that we know. So in each case, it was really the tables that I was illustrating. So here is a table which shows wealth inequality in various European countries, Japan and the US. And you can see it's actually showing that the inequality declines over a period of time between 1900 and about 1980. And then it rises again. And during that same period of time, if you look at taxation in those same countries, in that same period of time, the rich are taxed, and the rich are taxed. Let's just say that. So that's the next video I made was, oh, just to let you know, you can, you don't have to read Piketty's book. You can go and find his tables online. I could put the link in the chat at some point. But anyway, if you don't mind, maybe we can see the second video. And I will.
I am Pik, thinker, maker, reenactor.
I'm Etty, observer, analyste, rénactor.
Piketty and progressive taxation. 1900, 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
By 1980, 10% of the people own 50 to 55% of the wealth.
A significant redistribution.
How can we explain this?
A lot happens during these years.
1914.
Over the top we go. We need more troops.
These recruits are small and weak. They did not get enough food when they were children.
We need them anyway.
Between 1900 and 1932. Taxes for the rich were low.
Average top income tax, US, 23%, UK 30%, Germany 18%.
France 23, Japan 26.
Average top inheritance tax, US, 12%, UK 25%, Germany 8%.
France 15, Japan 9.
The Roaring Twenties.
The 1930s. By 1932, in response to war and depression, taxes for the rich are higher.
A policy of progressive taxation will prevent the US from becoming as inegalitarian as old Europe.
The UK is more progressive.
Not if you look at the inheritance tax.
Even so, we're much more progressive than the others.
Progressive taxation continued through the following decades. More people are living the good life.
And business is booming. Between 1932 and 1980, taxes for the rich are high.
Average top income tax, US 81%, UK 89%, Germany 58%, France 60%, Japan 68%. Average top inheritance tax, US 75%, UK 72%.
No, no, no.
Germany
Mon
23%,
argent.
France 22%,
It's draining away.
Japan
We must
64%.
stop it.
So, Josephine, are there more forthcoming? Because I think at the end you say coming up next.
Yeah, I have the idea that the next one is going to be called either I can't decide, they worked hard for our money or we worked hard for their money. These two, both of them were taken from the statistics that Piketty collected. The third one is harder, and I think it will be harder to do, and it comes more from that geographer David Harvey. Basically David Harvey's take on Marx, and I want to do something that sort of is much more of a basic economic description of how wealth is made, how value is added, how labor makes wealth, and how that wealth is extracted, and just that whole circle of extraction. I think in some ways, it sounds like a little, I don't know, extreme, but I'm thinking of these in some ways as public service announcements. It's like, we know, I feel that I know very little about economics and how it works, but I also think that that's very common in that's just common to many people, and many of my students, many of my acquaintances and friends. I feel that we know little, and it perhaps is good to have ways of trying to spread a little bit more understanding of some of these issues. I think especially now, there's a whole, I mean, I think worldwide discussion about taxes, and how, you know, if you have a different tax policy can actually prevent the concentration of wealth. And I think that's Piketty's argument. So that's why I like these particular statistics, because it shows that a policy, a deliberate government policy, not the free hand of the market, not some magic, can make a difference to people's lives. And I think there's a pretty knee-jerk reaction that taxation is bad for many people, and it would be just I just think it's important that people should know that maybe it's not such just to have a little bit more historical understanding of how taxation has worked, and how in this case between the 30s and the 80s taxation worked to bring more money to more people, and at the same time it didn't. I think that the story always goes that taxing the rich or taxing corporations will stop capitalism from working and everybody will suffer. But clearly everything boomed between the 30s and the 80s, and other things were involved, of course, but these tax policies were then in place. We could look back and go, yeah, this is the time in which we also kind of started to, you know, the way in which global warming and all the destruction of the planet environmentally took off as well, because we consume so much, and that's another argument. But I guess, yes, the short answer is yes, I do want to make that third video, and then you know, depending on how things go, maybe I would start doing some videos that were more about the environmental issues.
Yeah, I think you really, or we see something really interesting here in Baton Rouge, which is, you know, the sort of co-option of racial justice movements by like Black capitalism, and we have something on our block that's called Black gentrification. And so it's this real conflation of systemic injustice and racial issues with kind of a perhaps not very nuanced understanding of economic policy. So it seems like a really pertinent time to be trying to provide more information about that.
Yeah, I really agree, and I think in some ways the reason I wanted to do the third one was much more because I don't know, especially because I also teach a class called Green Media, and we talk about environmentalism a lot, but I was struck at some point in my career as a professor to understand that people thought of like kind of Darwin's theory of evolution, and you know, competition is the bedrock and the way everything works, and they thought of capitalism as being, you know, that's just the way nature is. Capitalism is natural. Capitalism is nature. And it completely freaked me out to understand that students who I thought was bright, intelligent, clever students, kind of conflated those two things. So I do really have an interest in trying to introduce a kind of Marxist analysis of wealth creation into this set of videos. Although I think I'm also a little, I think it's very difficult. We do live in very polarized times, and I also have a sort of maybe hubristic, is that the word? Idea that these videos could reach people who are not anywhere near the left. So I you know, even who their very idea that they would reach people who find that idea of Marxism absolutely repellent, but we'll see. I haven't got to that one yet, but I would like to do it. I would like to make it.
Maybe that's a good segue, this idea that capitalism is Darwinian in some way, some expression of nature, into talking about kind of your turn towards this economic data from your previous work about consciousness and a kind of anthropology of consciousness and performance.
Okay, cool. Yes. The work I was doing, I'm going to remove my little props here, because I can't think with them in front of me. The work I was doing before this was called Improvising Consciousness. And it was actually a very hybrid work. It started off as performances, thinking about consciousness and thinking about consciousness and a kind of with respect to the evolution of consciousness, and also with respect to the development of consciousness and cognition in relationship to environment. And the idea that the thought that consciousness and cognition are not kind of abstract, but they're embedded in body, and the body is embedded in a specific environment. So my project, Improvising Consciousness, it ended up, it now exists online, but it sort of started off as various performances and sort of lecture performances. And in the lectures, I have an alter ego, Josephine Anstey, and she kind of is a pan-temporal being, and she comes to this time and place. She calls it era and area. She comes to this time and place to try and speak to the peoples of the earth about the history of consciousness and cognition and the great trouble that is coming their way. So how she traces the evolution of human cognition and consciousness, making clear their relationship to gradual and punctuated environmental pressures. And a central thesis of the work is that the cognitive module for spoken language was leveraged as a solution to survival pressures at around 12,000 BCE, but it's becoming an existential threat for humans by the year 2000. So she talks about the past, and she also talks about the future. So there's a sort of creative non-fiction element to it, and then a sort of science fiction element to it. And I ended up making videos for 3/4 of it, or 4/6 of it. So, and then as well as the videos, there are these things called cognitive exercises, and the cognitive exercises are designed to make you experience a different consciousness, which is kind of where me and a group of students started. We wanted to build these experiences that would let you experience your consciousness differently, which of course is completely impossible, but we thought, we played around with it quite a lot. So this work is sort of online. It's almost like a kind of, I don't know what it is. It's Josephine Anstey's website, and it has the lectures on it, and it has links to the cognitive exercises. And we thought we would show you one of the videos, which is called the bicameral mind. So we can show that.
To some, this is the fall. Not knowledge of good and evil, not disobeying God, but the time when all knowledge starts to pass under the dominion of language and God is conceived. In the second video of the series, I discussed the switch caused by global survival pressures from the ancient walk-through mind to the bicameral mind, with its two very different chambers, the God side and the human side. A hallucinated voice of wisdom emanating from the right side of the brain commands and advises the left side. Neither side has consciousness as you know it. The bicameral mind is the dominant mind configuration for 9 1,000 years. It's immensely successful. The end of the bicameral era sees the rise of the huge cities and civilizations your earliest archaeological digs have uncovered. But it's very hard for peoples of your area to come to an intuitive understanding of this mind configuration. In this third video, I try to destabilize your everyday mindset and give you a sense of what it's like to have a bicameral mind. First, let's focus on how the right side of the mind becomes the voice of God. At the dawn of the bicameral era, only elders, group leaders and visionaries are capable of that hallucinatory trick of hearing the deep knowledge of the world formed in their right brains as verbal commands. They speak the commands out loud and the rest of us internalize them, and gradually hearing inner admonitions becomes a more common but still highly prized ability. Because it is only by obeying the voice in our head that we can now successfully accomplish the agricultural tasks we depend on. Our elders and visionaries die, but their voices remain faintly echoing in our minds. We feel the loss of this precious source of knowledge, so we prop them up in the centre of our settlement, remove the organs that rot easily, dry them out, wrap them up. And their voices remain strong. Wisdom flows from their open mouths to our inner ears. As the centuries go by, we build shrines and altars around our talking dead, and statues with open mouths replace the actual bodies. Yes, we begin to think of them as gods. To some, this is the fall. Not knowledge of good and evil, not disobeying God, but the time when all knowledge starts to pass under the dominion of language and God is conceived. Language is a cognitive tool set specialized for the group domain, dealing in entities and their intentions. So a voice must come from an entity, even if it's dead or invisible. And an entity this wise, this all-knowing, must be superhuman. When it passes into language, people start to attribute the knowledge built by silent and collective walk-through processes in their own brains to a god. And consciousness? The right side of the brain operates outside it, while the left side of the brain obeys the voice in its head and is equally unconscious. Strange and heady stuff. If it all seems completely impossible, I do advise you to review videos 1 and 2. But you might be saying, maybe it's possible for very ancient people in tiny agricultural settlements to live with this weird mind, but how can there be bicameral cities? What can civilization without consciousness look like? We're going to jump to 3,500 BCE and look closely at one of these city kingdoms. Imagine in the middle of an immense plain, a golden city rises to the sky, carved from sandstone, shaped like a ziggurat. The city of Har and Hiva. Ox carts rumble through the gates laden with grain, vegetables, ducks and geese, animal skins, rock salts, clay. Har speaks in the mind of the drovers, guiding us to the central square, telling us where to unload our goods. We hum the injunctions along with our God. Har's priests sing a welcome and go quickly about Har's work, recording the goods, sending them to storage. Har's voice emerges in the chanting of the runners as we bring grain sacks to the storehouses, skins to the leather workers, 12 straining boys hauling clay to Potter's Lane. The potter's priestess calls out Ha's measure as she divides the clay, assigning to each potter the allowance that the god ordains. Soon from the potter's yard rises the murmur of our pot making. Heva's voice animates us. We sing her knowledge of strong pots, round pots, water pots, handles that stay on, lids that fit, cups that caress the drinking lip. Thus and so mould the clay, thus and so. Rhyme and reason flow through the city, through priests, artisans, children. Ants smell and taste to find their path, to understand their role in their anthills, but the people hear and sing the glorious voice of their gods. Unconscious and unquestioning is their obedience, channeling through the city, through their minds, and right into their actions. Consciousness resides at the city level, made possible by the right brain's co-option of command language to organize the exploitation and sharing of world resources. In video 2, we saw this command language developed side by side with linguistic practices that mediate intentions in the group. So what happens to this aspect of language in the bicameral city? Running along in the nooks and crannies of this great consciousness, like mice in a grain store, language acts of flirting, joking, soothing, encouraging, flourish. They serve as the low-level glue of the city, holding it together with effective bonds. They serve as low-level grease for the city, managing friction. This use of language is often called the woman's voice. It invisibly handles social relationships, working as unconsciously as grooming. There is a strong and absolute taboo between mixing the language of command, God's voice, and the language of intention, woman's voice. These bicameral city kingdoms are so strong, so intricate, so complex, so perfect, and so flourishing. But by 3,000 years BCE, they are headed into such catastrophe that again human beings are forced to adapt or die.
So thanks for sharing that older work with us. If you have thoughts about, the relationship between bicameral mind and the persona of Jennifer Anstey and how she informs your new work, we'd love to hear it. But we also don't want to miss some of the questions from the chat about the Piketty work. So it's up to you if you want to, which direction you want to go.
Goodness. I am happy to do either. I think watching that again, I was just struck by, I guess already then I was sort of thinking about various sort of questions of animation. I got a couple of collaborators to do animations for me for that series, that Improvising Consciousness series. And then earlier in the series, when we were doing performances, we with a little like figure. We had a one of the cognitive exercises was the, what was it called, the alter ego exercise, where we had people build alter egos with little puppets, like pegs, like with pegs. They would build an alter ego, and then we have them act out performances with their alter ego. And I think the issue was always around the idea about single consciousness or multiple consciousnesses, sort of consciousness without cognition, without consciousness, language without consciousness, and all these things that we were trying to sort of play with and get people to kind of experience as much as we could. And then there it said at the end, if you want to experience the bicameral mind, you can do the bicameral mind exercise, which actually exists at imcom.org. And in fact, Lucy was a performer for that as well. And it's essentially trying to split your mind into two parts. It doesn't work, but it was a lot of fun. And so I'm just looking at it again, I'm realizing already the sort of the roots of playing with kind of puppet characters, well, with physical but little puppety type characters is clearly in that improvising consciousness work. And then if we go back another step, my VR work was also, there was something about having kind of puppets and avatars or puppet avatars, which was part of that. So I think they all link together aesthetically in a way that I wasn't quite aware of. So yes, so that if there's any other questions about that, we can do them, but I'm happy to go back to the other questions about the other work as well.
Yeah, so we have a great question from the chat from earlier about how does Piketty's philosophy inform reparations in the US?
I think that's a really great question, and I don't think I know enough about Piketty to answer it really clearly. I don't think he's a French economist. I am not really aware of, and I've read like half of that book, not all of it. I did not see specifically things about race particularly noted in his book, or about, I think race and empire certainly noted in colonialism, but the question of reparations, I don't think he addresses. And I think it's a tricky question, and I think it's a very important question, reparations in the US, and it's a huge issue in England at the moment. You know, like the riches of England that was firmly established by the slave trade, the early, and then England turned against the slave trade, but they were still benefiting from it because they were taking cotton from the Americas. And at some point, the workers in England, the cotton workers, were trying to gather together to prevent cotton coming from the Americas. But the issue of reparations is a huge one, and I mean, just jumping sideways, I'm just thinking about the COP26, is it? And the issue of putting money aside for developing countries and countries that are being more affected by climate change than others. And that is another, I mean, that's a huge issue. Who is being affected by, who is being damaged by global warming and climate change and environmental degradation of all sorts. And again, it's this, you know, the same people are being affected, and African Americans are often in these areas where there's you know, factories putting out pollution, and have been in the forefront of some of these fights for the environment. But as far as Piketty and reparations go, I don't know. I'd have to look that up more.
And what about Marx versus Piketty? What do you, you were talking about your kind of grounded in Marxism, and what are you kind of seeing in Piketty that can build on that, or?
I think I would need to read Piketty more thoroughly. I was looking, because I never read capital and in the 21st century. But in that book, I believe the thesis of the book is that it is the mechanisms of capitalism tend to concentrate wealth. And that was the basic thesis. And I am not sure how much Piketty considers himself a Marxist. The thing I was saying about ideology is, I guess, the Piketty very explicitly in the introduction of this book says, and I said it at the beginning, he says, where is it? He's calling for a new universalistic and egalitarian narrative. And I suppose just that moment when he talks about the stories and the narratives that drive society, and of course, if you're more coming from a more Marxist position, there's of course a dialectic between the economic base and the ideology, but the kind of rather bold, it seemed to me a little bit bold statement of just calling for a universalistic and egalitarian narrative. It just seems like we can call for it, and I do think it's really important. I mean, I think ideological work is really important. That's clearly the realm, that's clearly the theater I'm in. I'm making works that exist in the the ideological superstructure, but clearly it can't be the only thing, and we got to look at the ways the economic exchanges, and we got to look at the ways social movements and activism have to be part of any change. Having said that, I do think that it is important to work in the ideological arena, to inform, to make people laugh, to make people think. So I would need to read Marx and Piketty a little bit closer, though, to have a good answer for that question.
I think there's an interesting idea in the PSA format, so are you thinking about how you're going to deploy these sort of in that realm?
Okay, yes. In fact, we could do some deployment now. Okay, so where would I deploy this? And so yes, on YouTube, and I also will put them. I am now planning right this instant to send out a version of Piketty on Twitter and on Facebook. So I actually have that here to do in this very moment.
And this is the launch.
This is the launch, the actual launch. So I don't know if people are, I am horrifyingly don't have many people. Oh, I somehow have something on my Twitter field. Okay, so I'm gonna tweet now. Right now, I'm gonna tweet. I'm tweeting. I have tweeted. I think I've tweeted. It might take a bit of time to get there, but I've tweeted out a short version of Piketty. It has to be, for Twitter, it has to be 2.2. You know what? I just tweeted it out on the wrong Twitter feed. I just tweeted it out on a Twitter account that is not my own Twitter account, but it's a second Twitter account.
It's a guerrilla PSA. It's
yeah,
I
wonder if I can like it or share it. Oh, good grief! I'm such an idiot. I'm going to launch the Facebook one. Well, I'm at it too, so I'm launching that one. But the okay, let's go back to Twitter. I just tweeted. I have an account called Fuzzy Wawa, which is about fizzy water, and I just tweeted it on that account instead of in my Josephine Anstey account. What an idiot am I?
I prefer to think of it as a Kismet guerrilla takeover.
and I'm sure I should be able to find it and share. Well, at some point I'll send it to people. But if it's there. That's my great launch, and I've launched it very underground. But I will relaunch it on my regular Twitter feed. I have had this desire that I reach Thomas Piketty by this sort of 6 degrees of separation method, and I haven't got there yet. But if people have a chance to look for it on Twitter when I send it out properly, and look for it on Facebook and share it, I have every expectation it will get to Thomas Piketty in the end. As well, because my social media impact isn't that great, I'm also submitting these videos to animation festivals. Animation festivals are not the biggest audience in the world, but I think it's an audience that I would like to reach. I would like to reach anybody I possibly can, basically, with these videos.
Josephine, you have a great question in the chat. Do you have any suspicions on why the working class is at present in the USA so enthusiastic for politicians who rally against infrastructure and other spending that supports the working class? Or does Piketty provide any insights?
I think that's a great question. I'm just looking over here because I can see it. I think the short, there is no short answer. The answer I can give at some level, it just sort of is up in this stratosphere of ideology. I think the right, the neoliberals, have done an absolutely fabulous job of pushing narratives that make you feel pushing narratives that support this way of thinking. And Piketty in Ideology and Capital and Ideology describes them as the narratives of meritocracy, entrepreneurship, and property. So people think, this is mine. So we're very seduced, and I think this is a very material thing. We're very seduced by our consumer culture. We see other people with things, and we want those things. We want a new phone every 2 years. We want to be warm. We want to be dry. We see other people with those benefits, and we think, well, why shouldn't I have them? In America, of course, there is always the American dream of each generation does better and better and better, which I think the video really shows how that came into force after the Second World War, and really seemed to be the case. It was like the period in which I've lived, everything looked like it was on the up and up. There we were, all getting fairer and more equal. There were all the human rights movements, the civil rights movement, the gay movement, feminism, it all just, and then later transgender rights, all looks like it's moving in the right direction. And then suddenly we have this like whiplash. I think what Piketty is saying is these three things that he picks out: property, meritocracy, and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is something huge. People think, yes, I'm gonna be that person. So I think at some level it speaks to the selling of desire for things and for being a successful person. And we don't want to give that up for a different narrative that says we should, we live or die together. Collectively, but I think those narratives have to be made. I would love it if I could talk more about the economics of the situation, but I feel that I'm really only able to talk a little bit about the sort of ideological level of that question.
So something that we've been thinking and talking a lot about here is kind of exhaustion and the attention economy. And, your work sits so nicely in that kind of discussion in this PSA format and through the use of claymation. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about, you know, how gamification strategies are sort of used in terms of exhaustion and how media work can maybe break that.
I think I have two completely different thoughts, and one is this, and where I've gone with this work, which is make it as short as you can. I mentioned that I teach a green media class, and in that green media class, one of the things we listen to is somebody talking about social media campaigns and trying to change people's minds around the environment. And he's saying you got to fit into the 10 seconds somebody has, and they want to be entertained. They don't want to be lectured. So I think I did take that on a little bit with this work. Try to be amusing, try to be light, but try and get the message in there. So that's one thing. But the other thing I think is like the opposite. And I also teach in that class. We look at work that's really just trying to change the way you relate to media, to try and slow down. And I don't know if media is even the thing you should be doing for this, but we watch very slow, long movies with very slow, long takes. We actually play some games that are less about winning and more about just being embedded in an environment. And I think actually, when it comes down to it, probably going outside and being in the environment is probably the better thing to do. I don't know. It's like the more we compete for these small amounts of energy that people have, I think the worse it gets in some way. So I am somewhat of an advocate for trying to slow people down in whatever way we can do it.
So we have also a question kind of relating back to your technique about sound and your use of sound, as well as an earlier question about what one of the tracks was. I think it was the piano blues track.
That's been hugely fun for me, is to do the sound. So I basically spent a lot of time looking for sounds and grabbing sounds and finding different sites for grabbing sounds. So free SFX is one of them, and then melody loops. And melody loops, I think that the blues track that they're referring to comes from this site, Melody Loops. And it's, as far as I can see, there are musicians, and I think a lot of them are in Eastern Europe, and they make tracks for the use, to be used for videos, social media, or whatever you want, and you buy them. And one thing that I was kind of trying not to do is to steal too much, but to get material, if I could get it free, that was great. But at least I was going to give, attribute. I would attribute, or I would give credit to the makers, and the melody loops, you actually buy them, but it's like you don't have to pay a lot of money. So I actually did get some stuff from archive.org, which is one of the blues tracks, and I'm a little unsure. They changed the law, and I'm not completely sure. I know I've seen it in other places on YouTube, so I'm hoping for the best with it. But it's just been a lot of fun for me to use to do the sound, and I enjoy doing the sound kind of a great deal.
Well, thank you so much for launching these videos here with us today at Yes We Cannibal. If there's any last questions in the chat, maybe this is a good place to wrap up. And we want to appeal to you, our Twitch viewers, to make the connection between Piketty and micro patronage, which is what supports Yes We Cannibal. All of our events are completely free, and they are meant as meeting spaces for people across disciplines, across interests. And in support of that, if you would like to support that, please check out our Patreon page so that we can keep providing this home for experimental thought, experimental art across disciplines and across mediums. Thank you so much, Josephine Anstey, and a big thank you to our current Patreon supporters for helping us make this happen.
I'd just like to say thanks to you, Liz, and to Matt, and to everybody that came today. Thank you very much for coming, and thanks for your questions.
Oh, we have one last question in the chat, Josephine. Your sense of timing, can you discuss that?
I can discuss my sense of timing because, let me say, I have pretty much, although I've worked in media all of my working life, I at some level consider myself a writer. The first works I did were with Julie Zando. I made videos with Julie Zando. She made the videos and I was like the writer in the background. And then I kind of went through VR and I did some radio and I did these performances. And then I came back to sort of doing video. I find it extraordinarily hard. If I'm writing, I think I have a good sense of what should be there, what shouldn't be there, how to change things around, how to get how to do the equivalent of timing in writing. But in video, I find myself wishing I were better at it. So I learned some things from Julie all those many years ago, and something about rhythm. And I sometimes do it quite, this is going to be 3 seconds, and this is going to be 3 seconds, and this is going to be 3 seconds. So I wish I were better at it. That's the only thing I have to say.
Okay, thank you so much, Josephine. And what a plug for experimentation and continuing to grow that experimentation. So I think we're going to end here. Please feel free to reach out to Josephine and to spread her video on Twitter. Josephine, do you want to put a link in the chat to your Twitter?
Yes, I do. Let me see. I've got it here. So I actually put it somewhere, which I've now lost. Okay, so here is the Twitter. I'm putting it in the chat here, I guess, for you. Can I put it in the, can you put it in the Twitch Twitter?
Yes, I definitely can.
Okay, and it should be it should be there soon. The Piketty, and it would be great if people spread it. Thank you.
And you'll also be able to watch this artist talk archived on YouTube at some point soon on the Yes We Cannibal YouTube channel, where you can see previous Meet performances. So thank you again to all of our viewers and all the supporters of Yes We Cannibal and the work we're doing here. And we look forward to seeing you December 5th for Soul Lab Sundays.